Pig and Whistle Tales from Azeroth. As always here at the Pig and Whistle in the Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. So grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy. Today's subject, we're going to be going over sort of what makes a good expansion and sort of my takes on what the best expansion is, you know, the pros and cons to each expansion, what they did right, what they did wrong, what they offered, that kind of thing. But as always, the weekly stuff will get done first. So there's only a couple things this week. It is the Brawl, and that is the Temple of Hot Mogu, so everything's a little bit more fast paced in this battleground. You can get some conquest and some honour, nice and easy. You can even earn some renown, I believe, in there, in the Brawls. So definitely head on in there, grab yourselves that little bit extra currency and stuff. The bonus event for this week is the World Quest, so you'll get an extra bit of reputation for each world quest that you complete with that faction. So if it's a Kyrian world quest, you'll get more rep. I think it's like double the amount of rep that you would usually from that world quest with the Kyrian faction. The boss obviously for this week is Morgeth, and it is Aronomonos, the ever branching. So make sure you head into Ardenweald and head into the Moor, kill them, grab your anima, get all the weekly stuff, and you're good to go. So what makes a good expansion? Now, I've kind of broke it down into a few things, but you've got mainly leveling experience in this expansion. Some will have more leveling experience, some will have less so, because of, you know, the amount of levels that you gain. There's only a few of these that differ. Classic, obviously, because you're going from 1 to 60, Cataclysm, and I think that's it. Yeah, that's literally it. And obviously you're going from Mists of Pandaria, so Cataclysm, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria, they're all five level increments, apart from the usual 10. You have endgame content, you know, PvP, raids, any other sort of things that you can do, such as pet battles, which come up in an expansion, that kind of thing. You have other systems that make an expansion what they are, and these systems can be a variety of things. It can be world PvP, such as Ashran in Warlords of Draenor. It can be multiple variations of like the Covenant Sanctums, the class halls, that kind of thing. And you have the story that's within the expansion itself. Now, these are the biggest ones for me. Obviously, everyone defines a expansion differently, but these are the biggest ones, what make an expansion good for me. And generally, obviously, you're going to go with the content that was released within that expansion. That's a real given, but these are the 4 things that I want to sort of focus on when looking at what makes a good World of Warcraft expansion. So I'm not really sure how I wanted to lay this out, so I'm going to go through sort of all of the expansions and what they brought into the game, discuss it a little bit, and then at the very end give my take on the best to worst sort of expansions. Now, this is again my opinion. I'm definitely not speaking for everyone here, but I feel like some people might agree with me, some people might not. It's all personal preference, and it's just something that I wanted to do, really. So, Classic. Now, it's really tough to define Classic as an expansion. It is the base game. So, Classic is in a completely different area to its own, or to the others. This is the fundamentals of the game that were brought in: leveling, questing, PvP, you know, raids, the very start of raids. It gave us everything that we already take for granted in WoW after a few expansions or several expansions, and that are still within the game, such as battlegrounds, raiding. They are especially raiding, a core element of World of Warcraft right now with, say, mythic raiding. If you look at like Echo or Limit and them sort of, high-end raiding teams, it all started within Classic. Raiding started within Classic and it only evolved. So it's tough to put Classic in this, but I will do my best at the end. So TBC is the very first expansion that we get to. Now, what TBC introduced to us was obviously the first 2 new races, which were Draenei and Blood Elves, so 1 for each faction, respectively. And it also introduced us to, it gave the opposite faction a new class. So in Classic, Paladins were Alliance exclusive, and Horde got Shamans, which were exclusive to them. They took this out in TBC, and the Draenei could be a Shaman, and the Blood Elves could be a Paladin, so there was a cross-faction, or everyone had every access to the classes. There was no sort of Shamans are Horde only, Paladins are Horde only, so it's really good, to be honest. That was a really good change, because a load of people envied Shamans, some people envied Paladins, I don't know why in Classic, not the best. Maybe for healing, but yeah, not a good DPS or tank spec, really. Arenas were also brought in TBC. Now, this is really big, because the only way that you could really experience PvP was either open world, or you could hop into a battleground with your friends. Now, battlegrounds weren't necessarily the best place to have, some quality time with your mates. Arenas brought it to another level, because you could have 2v2 teams, 3v3 and 5v5, so you can really mix and match who you're playing with on the day. You can get multiple people on the day, and you can make a 5v5 team. You can get only a couple of your mates, so you'd make a 3v3, or you just want to socialise with one friend that you haven't talked to in a while, and you both like PvP, so Arena it is, that kind of thing. And it also brought out a new battleground, the Storm. Now, this is a bit of a shake-up, because it's basically Warsong Gulch and Arathi Basin all in one. Now, you either had Warsong Gulch, Arathi Basin, or Outeric Valley in Classic. Not the best bunch of battlegrounds. Don't get me wrong, Arathi Basin and Warsong Gulch are amazing, but Outeric Valley is a bit of a bore, not going to lie. Especially in Classic, when the Horde actually had an advantage because of the map structure, which is honestly ridiculous. It's absolutely insane how the faction just won most of the Outeric Valleys because of where they spawned. It wasn't great. So I'm glad that they added the new battleground with it. And obviously the leveling experience was held in Outlands. Outlands being the home of the Orcs, which was formerly known as Draenor, and it was a land that had been shattered by Ner'zhul opening multiple portals and trying to give the Orcs a new home pretty much. But Outlands, an amazing experience, to be honest. Absolutely amazing seeing the barren wastelands of Hellfire. You got the marshes of Zangarmarsh, you got Terokkar Forest, the plains of Nagrand, you've got the spikes of Blade's Edge, the purpley mist of Shadowmoon, and then you've got I want to say purpley mist of Netherstorm as well, but the floating rocks of Netherstorm is probably the better way to go. You had so many different variations of scenery when levelling in Outland, and the quests were good. They were very simple, obviously. They're not going to be, you're going to go to the edge of the world and pick up this floating rock, throw it across to Nagrand, that kind of thing. It was just, your bread and butter, kill 12 boars in Hellfire, or whatever, I'm pretty sure it was. Get 12, boar blood vials and stuff like that. So they were your bread and butter, but the story that was told within them it's there, but you really have to look into the quests a lot more so, and that goes the same with raiding. So obviously Sunwell is the last raid of TBC. I forgot the expansion for some reason. And this ends up with you fighting Kil'jaeden. Now, Kil'jaeden being the one who was ordering around Illidan. Obviously, Illidan had his own sort of agenda, that kind of thing. So it's tough to decipher what was happening in Burning Crusade, mainly because you had to really look into the finer details. Whereas if you look at, say, like Legion, it's all pretty much given there in cinematics and stuff like that, so it's a lot easier to tell. So these are the sort of main points within TBC. Obviously, you have many other smaller things, but these are the big things that came with the expansion. Now, for Wrath of the Lich King, you had the first introduction of a hero class, and this is being Death Knight. Death Knight being a hero class that started at level 55 rather than the original level 1, which no other class could do at the time. And you were still with your faction, you were a fallen hero of the Alliance or Horde, and you were initially hostile to them, and you earned their sort of forgiveness by breaking free of the Lich King's like grasp, that kind of thing. So, great starting experience for the Death Knights, to be honest. The whole Acarus, the Ebon Blade, and the whole, breaking free of the Lich King's grasp and all of that. It was an amazing storyline. You could visually see it. You didn't have to read the text, because this is when they started to implement a lot more text-to-speech sort of thing within the game when it's when you're doing like big quests, big important quests, like the Assault at Light's Hope Chapel, which is one of the last quest that you get for the Death Knights in order to go into Outland and start your journey there at level 58. So it was a lot easier. The story was explained a lot easier and a lot more in your face, to be honest. And they do a lot of this within the upcoming expansions, to be honest. Since Wrath of the Lich King, it was a lot more. The dialogue was meant for the important pieces within the story, and it was given to the player base a lot easier rather than having to go into a lot of detail, reading every quest and that kind of thing as to why you're doing this. Now, obviously, there are hidden gems within quests as well, and they do press the story along in all of these expansions, so by all means look at the quest text and read it. Read while you're doing this. It makes sense as to why you're doing it, but the big bulkier or the more important parts were given in this sort of text stuff. And obviously you had the continent of Northrend. So Northrend being where the Lich King resides. Again, it had a great variety of environments. You had Solazar Basin, that was another sort of foresty, like a Stranglethorn Vale type place. You had Marine Tundra, very plain, it had a lot of colours to it, but it was kind of a darker, more mucky sort of area. You had Crystal Song Forest, a very small place but very nice. Dragonblight, all white, snow everywhere, very nice. Ice Crown. Now, Ice Crown, seeing this zone was absolutely amazing. The skybox was dark. It had a real sort of evil aura around this zone, and that's what made it for me. That's what made this entire sort of expansion worth it. Just get into that zone and leveling in that zone. You start off at your little camp in the bottom right of the zone, and you sort of advanced your way through the zone up until the Citadel, where it eventually was broken open in patch 3.3, and you could assault Icecrown Citadel and kill the Lich King and stuff like that. Now, obviously, TBC and Wrath of the Lich King both had villains who were in the old Warcraft games, so Warcraft 1, 2 and 3, that kind of thing. So these expansions are very good, mainly because they wrap up some of these storylines, and they can even continue it on into further expansions, just like they do with a later expansion with Illidan and stuff like that. So from a lore perspective, wrapping up this loose end that they put in the RTS games is absolutely amazing, and everyone who loved Arthur's, the RTS game, Warcraft 3, the Frozen Throne DLC, they would have loved Wrath of the Lich King, I'm sure. It would have been quite rare to find someone who didn't like that expansion. Now for Kata, this is where a lot of things changed, and this is where people think that the downturn went for Blizzard. Now, this is true in terms of subscriber numbers because they did release the subscriber numbers from Classic, TBC, Wrath of the Lich King, Kata into Mists of Pandaria. And after Kata was released, that is their first drop in subscribers. And so you could say that this was there was only a downhill slope from when they released Cataclysm. But you have to bear in mind that no MMO had ever hit this height of 12 mil subscribers, I believe it was at the time. And to keep 12 million people subscribed to a game that's going to be tough. You're going to lose a lot of people. And inevitably, obviously, this is when Cataclysm hit. Loads of people enjoyed the start of the expansion, but it went downhill because of there were a lot of fundamental changes to the world of Azeroth as it was in Classic. This is what a lot of people grew up with and learned and knew what to do, and they couldn't be asked to sort of learn it again, I guess. So what do I mean by that? It is a new Azeroth. They completely revamped the entirety of the old world. So they implemented loads of new quests, over 3,500 new quests, actually, which is absolutely insane. They also added the next races, which was Worgen and Goblins. Goblins for the Horde, Worgen for the Alliance. And they added a few new zones onto Azeroth. So you have like Twilight Highlands, Vashir, you have... God, I can't even remember. Mount Hyjal. Hyjal was a very good zone, by the way. That one was that was kind of the redeeming quality of Cataclysm, I'm not going to lie. There were a few more zones added onto Azeroth as we know it, and these zones would be where you level. So with the expansion, it basically revamped the entire world as we know it, and it was basically starting again. And it was basically you start Classic again, but everything's different. Like, these aren't the quests that you know. Suddenly, instead of killing 12 boars, you've got to go out, find 6 boar furs on the ground that are like 20 more miles away from you and stuff like that. Obviously, it's a bit extreme, but even down to, like the starting quests weren't affected. I think they were one of the only ones that weren't really, which was like, for the Night Elves, kill 6 boars and like 6 Night Sabers, that kind of thing. So after you leave that starting zone, that's when all of the quests were changed and stuff like that. So Kata did something that no other expansioner did and revamped what everyone already knew, what everyone was already comfortable with. So this one was a big sort of roll of the dice. It was either going to be an absolute hit or kind of a meh, I can't be asked learning this again. And I think that's kind of where it hit, to be honest. For Mists of Pandaria, you have the Monk and the Pandaren. So you've got a new class and a new race. Pandaren obviously being the race that can pick between Horde or Alliance when they have completed their initial starting zone. They are faction neutral, so you can see them on both sides. Monk obviously being a bit broken in Shadowlands right now. We'll get to Shadowlands soon, but it is the new class available to most of the other races of Azeroth, so humans, gnomes I'm pretty sure as well. You've got orc, monks, stuff like that. So that was implemented in. Now, they introduced the first sort of mythic challenges, and it was called Challenge Mode. And what this was is you had to finish the dungeon as quickly as you can for rewards. And these rewards were cosmetics, these rewards were pets, that kind of thing. And the pets might have been actually quite useful for people wanting to do pet battles, as this was the expansion that pet battles were brought into the game. Now, this is a very much Pokemon style-esque type endgame content. I don't think many people liked it, but I don't see the reason not to like it. It's something there for if you ever want to do, and you could make gold out of it, to be honest. You can level up battle pets and sell them on the auction house at, the level that everyone wants them, level 25. So there was obviously some gold making potential in that, but I don't really see why everyone got like overly fussed about battle pairs. I thought it was a nice little thing to add to the game. It's some in-game content that people would like to at least try out, I would have imagined. And this is when another controversial change was made. This is when the new talent trees were brought in. So instead of your original, you obviously still had the 3 specializations, but instead of the talent tree where you're putting in about 70, 80, I believe, talent points, you'd get 6 like lines of 3, and basically you'd have to pick one of these spells or passive abilities from each line. So this is when the talent tree really switched that up. Now, obviously, they couldn't keep going down this the old talent tree, because they'd end up with something that looks like a damn spider's web, and it would just be super long, and you're just gonna at the end have about 110, talent points to put in, and they would eventually run out of ideas for it. Whereas this was a lot more simple, a lot more easier to balance and stuff like that. And obviously, with Mr. Pandaria, we got Pandaria. It's a mist that was just, in smoke right there at the bottom of the world. It's one of them things. Now, with Pandaria, it sounds very lush, sounds very beautiful, and it kind of was. The zones in there were very green, they were very vibrant, lively. Obviously, a couple of zones had, completely went against that. It was sort of withered. It was very much bad omens were here, bad entities and stuff like that. And it was very mountainous, snow everywhere in some zones. So it's not dynamic. The diversity in zones was very good. It was very good, and I think it was one of the more beautiful zones to sort of look at, to be honest, especially the starting zone of like the Jade Forest. It's a very long, thin piece of land that's just lush with jungle, that kind of thing. Now, the next expansion was Warlords of Draenor. Not many people like this. I'm going to say that right now. Warlords of Draenor brought a few things to it. And by a few, I mean a few, because, there was a big content drought during Warlords of Draenor. I'm not going to deny that. So, firstly, they brought the character overhaul. And what this was is basically an update for your character's looks. So, the way that they moved in-game, the way that they used their facial expressions was updated. It basically immersed the viewer or the gamer a lot more so than what you had in Classic, and from Classic to Mr. Pandaria. It was very stale, it was very robotic kind of thing, whereas this was a bit more fluent and, a lot more easier on the eye. Garrisons were obviously a big thing in Warlords of Draenor. This was Blizzard basically testing out sort of player housing in a sense, but what they didn't bank on is garrisons being too good. To be honest, they banked on it being a bit, underwhelming, that kind of thing. But garrisons just were incredible. There was no need to ever leave your garrison because it made you so much gold. It had everything there. It had daily pet battles. It had constant, money. It had everything to do with your professions. It had everything. It had absolutely everything. And they didn't really bank on this, so it wasn't the biggest hit for most people. I quite liked it. The very first time going into Warlords of Draenor and they're saying, do you wish to build your garrison? And I'm like, hell yeah, I do. Because that sounds amazing. Who doesn't want their own damn garrison? So I was really stoked for garrisons, and I still like them to this day. It's very controversial, but I like them to this day. I like having a place where I can just sort of AFK, look at my statues that I've got achievements of throughout the expansion, stuff like that. So I'm one of the lovers of the garrison, to be honest, but I think that is a more controversial statement more than anything. Now, they also introduced the new raid difficulty, which we have at the best of the best, to be honest, which is Mythic. And this has been a staple point ever since Warlords of Draenor. Big guilds, like I said, Echo and Limit, obviously do mythic raiding for a living. They make their money out of it, they make sponsorships out of it, and it's the very peak of raiding within WoW at this point. The very peak of raiding before that might have been, say, obviously it was killing on heroic difficulty from Wrath of the Lich King onwards, but beyond that, so Burning Crusade and Classic, it was very much who could kill him first, like who downed this boss first, that kind of thing. Now it's the same here, but this is a lot more intense and tougher and stuff like that, and yeah, this is probably one of the best things that they've ever done in Warlords of Draenor. This is what WoD brought to WoW, and it's probably one of the better ones, to be honest. One of the better changes, but that's kind of all WoD brought you. For Legion, we obviously had the introduction of a new class, Demon Hunter, another hero class for only two races per, or one race per faction, so Night Elves and Blood Elves, respectively. You obviously had the Mythic Dungeon, so the Mythic Plus, come into play in Legion, and I believe it's the same as what we have now. It's just been altered a tiny bit in terms of you get keys constantly upgrading and stuff like that. I believe you got it weekly back in Legion. You had class halls, you had artifact weapons, you had Broken Isles, and again, Broken Isles was amazing. You had so many diversities. We're not going to talk about Azshara, but if you look at Azshara in Broken Isles and then you look at Val'sharah, if I put them two side by side, I'm only looking at Val'sharah. Azshara isn't even in my peripheral vision. That zone is nothing compared to Val'sharah because of the storyline that it gave, the look of the zone. It was just amazing. They really nailed it with some of the zones in Broken Isles, to be honest. Azshara being the only exception, to be honest. So loads of stuff came in Legion. Now, obviously, we didn't get to keep some of this stuff, class halls and artifacts being the big ones, but at least we got to experience it for the time of the expansion, so I'm obviously going to keep it in there for what the expansion brought. Moving on to Battle for Azeroth, you obviously got Kultiris and Zandalar. This was the first time, I believe, that there were two new, continents added in an expansion. Now, each of them respectively being for each faction, kind of. So, Kultiris for Alliance and Zandalar for the Horde. And you would go to the opposite faction's continent to do a quest line, which was really cool because you got to experience it from a different perspective compared to the Horde, who might have been doing it or who might have been doing their own quest line. But for the Alliance, you're sort of infiltrating this continent, and vice versa for the Horde. So you got to see two different completely different sides of the continents through different quest lines on the different factions, respectively. BFA also brought in allied races. Now, this one is really good because it's something that can be added to throughout every single expansion. There is no limit to what an allied race can be, and they will definitely use this going forward, without a doubt, 100%. Now, you obviously got about 3, I believe it was. Yeah, 3 allied races going forward. In BFA, it was Lightforged, Draenei, Void Elves, and Mechanomes, I believe, for Alliance. And then you've got High Mountain Taurens, Zandalari, and the Volpira for Horde. So these can obviously be added to, as we've already seen in Shadowlands. And speaking of Shadowlands, we have Covenants, which kind of acted like class halls, but obviously they kind of are class halls and artifacts in one, because you get a place to sort of be safe and, get to switch out all of your spells and all of that. And they also gave you a spell like artifact weapons did, which can really impact your rotation, and which does for every single class in the game. You obviously had Shadowlands, which is the zone. Now, Shadowlands is very nice in terms of you've got 5 different places to go at the moment. The Moor being very dark and gloomy. You've got all of them are very much from one end of the spectrum to the other. Dark and gloomy to Bastion, which is bright and beautiful pretty much. And then you've got the few in between and stuff like that. So, a massive variety in Shadowlands. And it's definitely, worth seeing all of these sort of different, I forgot what they're called, zones, because it gives you a perspective of what goes through the minds of Blizzard pretty much when they make these sort of zones. They've done it for every single expansion. There's always, some bright coloured zones, and there's always some gloomy ones to go with it, and then you get sort of an in-between, because, everyone likes everything, to be honest. So if I had to rank in all of these expansions, Classic's a bit different, like I said at the very start. Classic, I would put at the very top, mainly because the only reason being Classic is what gave us World of Warcraft, the game. So without Classic, there would be no other expansion. So I would put it at the top, mainly for that reason, because it's very tough to rate in an expansion, as it were. But for me, playing through all of these expansions, with TBC being my last expansion, which I'm currently playing through now, through Burning Crusade Classic. Obviously, I've not experienced the entire thing yet, so I'm still a little bit... I don't necessarily have all the information that I want on it. But I would go with Wrath of the Lich King, to be honest. I started at the very beginning of Wrath of the Lich King, and I've loved it. I loved it. I loved the PvP. I loved everything about it. I would go with... To be honest, I would go with something like Legion. Legion is very, very good. I have very fond memories of Legion. I have very fond memories of the artifacts, the class halls, the quests, the storylines, the cinematics. It was absolutely incredible. Legion, I would definitely go for, just behind Wrath of the Lich King. Definitely, I would probably go Mists and Pandaria. Now, Mists is one that's kind of underrated, I would say, but I liked how PvP worked in Mists of Pandaria. I very much like the endgame stuff in Pandaria. I enjoyed it a lot. I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed the profession aspect of it. I enjoyed the little Harfill, I believe it's called, farm that you got given. So I really enjoyed Mists, to be honest. Following that, I'd probably go with TBC. TBC wasn't too bad, or isn't too bad, but I think it needs a lot more of the polish that Wrath of the Lich King, I think, gave it. Now, some of these things might be coming later on in TBC as like a sort of drop in later on in phase 4 or 5 maybe. But I think Wrath of the Lich King is just a very polished Burning Crusade. I would probably give Shadowlands the next one, mainly because the Covenants are very good. I like borrowed power sort of systems where you get a spell that really impacts your rotation, your class and stuff like that. Probably, it's tough between these ones with stuff like BFA, WoD and Kata. Kata I would probably put next, mainly because you still had the old talent system. I didn't necessarily see Classic as it was back in the day. I didn't see the quests, I didn't know the quests. I experienced a lot of my leveling in Cataclysm through the old world of Azeroth. So I didn't necessarily know what it was before until Classic TBC, or not, just Classic came out, World of Warcraft Classic. So I'll go with Kata next. Now, it's very controversial, I would say. I would put WoD here. I would put WoD next. Mainly because I didn't mind the garrison. The garrison is what turns people away from this expansion. Now, the lack of content is obviously very bad, but the raids that were in Warlords of Draenor, you cannot deny that they were some of the best raids that people have ever experienced, with stuff like Blackrock Foundry and stuff like that. Blackhand being one of the bosses that people praise the most within the game, and that came from Warlords of Draenor. The content that Warlords did have was amazing. and I don't think anyone can really dispute that. I mean, people will dispute the garrison, but what can you do? And then finally, it will be BFA last. I'm sorry, but I just didn't like it as much as what other people did. I find it annoying constantly travelling back and forth between the continents just to do a simple quest line. It was quite an inconvenience at points. Obviously, the allied races you had to unlock and stuff like that, but I just didn't find it as enjoyable. I really didn't. The storyline didn't capture me like some of the others, like Warlords of Draenor, Legion, Shadowlands, Wrath of the Lich King, anything like that. It really didn't capture me. So I would put BFA last. That is, unfortunately, that's where it sits. And that's my opinion on sort of what makes a good expansion, what rating or what order I would put the expansion in. Hi there, Warcraft fans. It's just me again. Wanted to thank you for your time in listening to this week's podcast. I love making these for you all, and I couldn't be happier in doing so. Seeing the downloads go up and up each week is amazing. You can show your support more by something as simple as rating this episode, or by dropping me a question via email that I can answer in a later podcast. To take it that extra step further and really show that you love the content that's being produced, you can check out the Pig and Whistle Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee page. Either of these would be a massive help to continue what I'm doing right now for you guys. Thank you all very much for your time, and go with Valor, friend.